Can you hear my dryer going off in the
Yes, I
background?
can. I was looking over the dogs to see if they were making that noise. The dryer has its own voice print.
Welcome to the Tech Aunties, where we spill the tech tea and give you the context behind the chaos. I'm Marion Newsom.
And I'm Gina Rosenthal.
We're industry veterans who've seen the cycles, survived the hype, and we're here to help you make sense of what's actually happening in tech. Each episode, we break down what matters, from AI to infrastructure to the chips and beyond, and to the future of work, so you can think clearly, not just react. Let's get into it.
All right. Let's kick it off with this week in women in tech history. This week, we're going to talk about Mary Goulda Ross, who's a Cherokee aerospace engineer. And she did a lot of stuff. She helped design fighter jets and big planes. She kept working for Lockheed after the war, and they sent her out to California. And she was one of the founders of the Advanced Development Program, aka Skunkworks. She did such amazing stuff that it is still top secret. She did a lot of high stakes works on controlled information flows. And that's what we're talking about today. What gets documented, what doesn't, and are the reasons that it can't be documented, and what kind of things get retained and retrieved and repurposed, all the kind of spy Secret Service stuff that you could imagine. So thought we should kick off this new program, and I'm happy to introduce a Cherokee woman in tech.
I do think that the Cherokee and all Native are not properly given their credit within tech. Other groups were very strong about speaking up, but I like that you're kicking off this feature to really start to bring a spotlight to those other achievements outside of the other women in tech.
Yeah, so I think we should keep this up every week. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, we'll do it.
So it's very interesting that you mentioned that you kicked off with her, given our topic today. So let's get into it. So you want to kick us off? Where are we going with this?
Let's kick it off. So there's a story about Talkspace, which is a mental health service provided by a lot of organizations because it's all remote. It's really quick to find a therapist. And most companies want to give that benefit to the folks that work for them. So the story is that one employee, a woman who was 9 months pregnant, got fired. She sued for unlawful termination during her 9th month of pregnancy because what are you supposed to do? That's actually a huge disruption. Think about the insurance and just everything. It's really horrible. So she had her therapist testify on her behalf. And because she did that, she opened up discoverability for her therapy sessions. And since they were on Talkspace, even though that company has promised everybody that their therapy sessions absolutely can't be identified, they're all made private, they anonymize them. They were able to bring in enough information and data that they got that case dismissed. So it's different than therapy. We think about it. It had just been her therapy and they had run discovery. It would have been very light notes that, oh, she seems better this week. She seems to have less harmful self-talk or whatever the therapist are writing down when you're talking. I have no idea because I've never seen it. But instead, they got the entire transcripts of her therapy session. If you've been to therapy, that is horrifying because that is supposed to be the one place where you can talk about things to try to work through them and get around any kind of blocks or challenges that you're facing. It's beyond therapy. As we look at using remote services or even Talkspaces, working on using all of the therapy sessions that they have recorded as the training grounds for the therapy bot that they're building. Should our therapy sessions, your deepest, darkest fears and secrets, become training for another AI bot, or should it be discoverable by anybody having a lawsuit against you? It's terrifying.
So if I go back to the Talkspace example, I guess my first question would be, who was her attorney who told her to even open that door? I probably would be looking at him or her right now a little bit differently because once you open the door, that the defense or the liability partner, whoever you're suing, has the right to actually, you open the door. I have every right to walk through it and see what else is there. So I hate that she got that kind of counsel, first of all. But I do agree, as the uses start to continue, especially for large companies, people as individuals, there's a lot of harm that can come from the talk spaces of the world actually taking your mental health and physical health data and using it for training. There are existing privacy regulations and security around HIPAA for research, all different kinds of existing. But I don't think that the use case for AI chatbots and making everything that you ever talk about or ever seen discoverable. But there are some precautions in the space.
There needs to be something, right? Because at this point, we all know that if it's free, which I don't think Talkspace is free to the employers, that actually would be a good question, right? But if you're getting it at a reduced cost, you're the product. So that means that content that is produced by recording, that's what's valuable. And it's not the money that they're charging you to use their therapist. It's really your content, the content of your deepest, darkest self is now the product that they were after.
So let's go back to the point about who was paying for Talkspace. If this was the employer's vendor, did
Yeah.
this vendor actually go through some kind of risk management and risk assessment? What was the contract around data transfer? Did you even consider AI considerations and the use of your employees' data before you signed Talkspace as a vendor? Because Talkspace is definitely getting paid. They may have reduced the rate, but that, again, who was her attorney? That falls upon the actual company who actually. Why would you ask a company that the person you're suing for is paying for your service to bring in evidence? I'm still stuck there, but I'll leave that alone. But
Hang on. Let's
it's
follow
vendor risk management. These are the kind of things corporations have to look at.
right.
You
But
bought in Talkspace. What was your agreement with the use of your company, your employees' data? What due diligence did you do?
or does that relationship, if the company is providing that, they're not the relationship, like with my doctor, right? The relationship's not between my company and the insurance company and my doctor. It's between me and my doctor. That's the relationship, because I think she brought in the therapist. But now you have Talkspace using AI to transcribe every single session and retaining those records and doing stuff with them. And they're absolutely identifiable because they were discoverable by the defense. Right? So they were able to go and discover it. And I get what you're saying,
But she
that
opened the door.
she
But
opened
I'll leave that alone because that's my whole problem with this particular case. You opened the door. You never, in a court proceeding, you don't open the door if you don't have the answers. And you know what's behind the door before you open it. I know if I've talked to them about things I don't want my employer to know. I also know if I've talked about things I do, and I have to weigh that risk. So here there's some personal accountability. But if she was using this through an EAP program,
yeah.
your company is paying for that. That's vendor risk management. They need to know exactly what service Talkspace would be providing and what are those data rules around this. Is people's personal identifiable data actually being used to train? Do you have that in your contracts to say, no, my employees' data cannot be used? It's not just Talkspace, it's actually wider, like you said. There's health plans, there's retirement plans, there's 401k plans,
Right.
all of these things that your data is involved with. And if it's company provided, that falls on the company. So I'll leave her attorney alone since I'm a failed law student. But what was he doing?
Do you think she would have had the avenue to go after the company then and talk or Talkspace? We're thinking I'm just having this relationship with I'm just talking on my phone or my computer with my therapist that you gave me through this program. But I didn't know I was being recorded and all of that information was being saved.
But you knew there were notes, right? So there's another thing, consent. What was the consent like?
Yeah.
When you log into these websites, what is the consent? Does it say that we use AI for transcription? Your data may be used in studies. Is it
Yeah.
anonymized? What was the consent? What did you actually consent for your data to be used? But
And they
I'm
said,
gonna,
yeah, they said their data is de-identified, but that's not really safe.
de-identified data still comes from real data a lot of the times, and I think that's the mistake people make when they hear the word de-identified. It's still coming from real data, and so the other one, is it dummy data that you made up to see if the system ran, or is it de-identified data that's actually coming either from personal data that has been scrubbed and put in groups and categories? We all know that story. Where How is that data de-identified?
Exactly. Ooh, there's a lot to think about. I was just trying to get a therapist. It's hard to get a therapist these days. I don't know. I guess these are good questions people should be asking though, right? Because one thing this story shows that it could feel confidential, that I'm having this conversation with my therapist like I always would, but that's not the same as being legally sealed, right? It's a private conversation I'm having, but then it's not privileged anymore because someone's got the recording.
So I think that's where we need to relook at HIPAA, because you do have protections for your health information. And those are mature regulations put in place for reasons. And so I think as we start to go more and more people, more and more into the use of AI, and this question about should that data be trained on? And is there a valuable use for the greater good? Absolutely. But how do we actually protect the privacy of the individual?
Yeah, and especially something like this. This is can you even imagine? This makes me never want to talk to anybody again. We talk and make sure there's no bugs.
But I think it's good. So every time you go to the doctor, first thing they want to know,
Can I use it?
let's see your ID, let's see your insurance, and they hand you these forms. And usually that consent form is there. Who can have release of my data? Maybe that's where it starts. You're asking me about who can have my data. Maybe I should be asking you who has it.
Yeah.
And so put the responsibility back where it belongs. It's my information. I may be giving it to you, but you ask me all my questions about who I want it released to or what you can do with it. What about telling me what you are doing with it?
Yeah, and that's probably something that needs to be re-instructed. These kind of things that come up, like number one, is somebody recording you? Do you know where this data is being shared? And do you know if somebody is, if you're okay with a transcript of every little thing, every little personal thing about you, is it truly anonymous or has it just been de-identified? Can that be put back together and called into court?
So if it's de-identified, if it's used in a study, but if I'm going to go into court and open that door, yeah, it's going to be my personal data because I'm the one bringing the suit.
That's just, ooh, it's just horrible when you think about it. It really is. Okay, so let's talk about how actually this is going on, right? So, how operationally did Talkspace mechanically save these records?
I think you said a really good word before. Talkspace is usually online, right? So it's online. How were they having the conversations? Zoom, team, a protected session. Most healthcare, telehealth is they have really mature regs in that space and really mature best practices in that space. And so I don't think you have to worry about everything, but when you're, you know,
Remote.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's what retention is, right? Like for it to be discoverable, the record has to be retained. So that's if, because I've had doctors ask me, hey, I'm going to talk, but I'm going to use this AI tool to record our conversation. Is that okay? And I had never really thought about it until I saw this lawsuit. But I think I would think about it if we're thinking about therapy, but just doing to get an EKG. Yeah, okay, whatever. I don't care. Maybe I care. I don't know. I'll say something dumb that somebody can pull up and say, no, we're not paying that bill, and this is why. So,
But like I said, some of this is already protected information. We don't want nobody not going to therapy or not going to the
Right,
doctor out
true.
of fear of their information being used. Because, like I said, they are some mature practices in the space. I think due diligence, I think you bring up some very good points. So I'm giving you my information. What are you doing with it? You don't tell me that every time I come here. And then I love the point about retention,
Yeah.
right? And so, how long are you keeping my data? Why are you keeping my data? Where are you keeping my data?
Yeah. Who else can access it? And are you keeping it just for the purpose of keeping a record so we can see long term how my health is improving or declining over the months and years? Or are you going to turn around and sell it to somebody so that they can make a new AI system, or that who knows what they would sell it for?
So, Jada, there are some areas where records retention, they have some real edge use cases, right? And so, when you think about standard use cases for I retain it 7 years, it's not standard for some industries. So, what does that look like? And so, I think you bring a very good point about retention. Not only what is being retained, how is it being destroyed? How is it actually being destroyed? And then how long is it kept and for what purpose?
Yeah. I mean, like healthcare is a great example because when you do clinical trials, that data usually lasts, is specified in the trial how long it will last. But if you're looking at things like a child study, that data usually lasts for the life of the expected lifespan of the children plus 10 years or 7 years or something like that. And I know you had an interesting one too.
Yes, I do. When we just think about some of the medical use cases out there and some of the privatized medical new services that are out there, like cryogenics, even the famous case where the cancer cells were used to produce treatments for cancer, that record retention, they were able to go back and prove chain of custody and those kind of cases. I won't get into the cryogenics, but yes, it is. That's an edge case. So, how long do you have to retain those records?
And I think most of us don't think about that when we go, especially if we're there for therapy, because a lot of times you're not in a happy place and you're worried about what's it going to be like to talk to this new person. And you don't think about the forms you sign at their office. You're just like, let's just get this started and get it over with so I can feel better. But I think that this obviously proves that it's important, especially if you're doing things in a newer way. I think it's amazing that you can go to therapy and not have to go into an office. But there's things to think about, obviously, as we see by this lawsuit.
Yeah, and I think the AI training piece is the new use case because they've taken notes, they've used every tool in the book, tape recorders, everything, videotape. I do think
Yeah,
they're online and being able to have those visual and notes is helpful because some therapists actually probably use video, Zoom, Teams, they want to see you. That's
yeah,
probably a very useful tool for them. When you're talking to someone who has issues in the home, you may see something that is reportable. So I do think it's a great use case. I just think the AI training piece, and as we have these data hungry companies looking for this data,
yeah,
create new products, new services, you still have to start asking. And yet, like you said before, I really don't want my mental issues or physical issues for that matter
yeah.
being tossed around by Claude AI and parceled out to the next person.
Yeah, it was interesting. You talked about the Henrietta Lacks case, right, with
Hmm.
the cancer. And it's the same as this. If your most private, vulnerable moments are all of a sudden used for data, that's kind of stripping you of your humanity. Might be for a good cause, but you should be able to say, yeah, that's okay. You can go ahead and use it. I think that's was always the case with the family of Henrietta Lacks, is her stripped her of her humanity. She just became a clump of cells, and this is just you just become a bunch of crazy things that you said out loud on a recorded medium.
You just become data points. You become
Exactly.
data points in a really bad period or day. But absolutely.
That's where some
So
governance needs to come in, right? To modernize HIPAA as much as everybody hates it, but there needs to be some kind of protection, that we're just not being stripped of who we are in mind for our own personal data. It's very extractive.
Oh, yeah. From a board governance standpoint, there's a lot here. Definitely around records retention. How are you onboarding these third party vendors? How are you asking them about the use of data on your employees? In AI tools and systems, there's probably a million tools, a million different ways, because this whole push in the future of work is AI is going to do this and it's going to do that. So we know that service providers have signed up for those things in some of the most delicate and innocent, I call them innocent domains, where you don't expect technology to be exploiting you at, so you trust it. Like kids' books on iPods and different things like that, cameras in the home, baby cams and things like that. I call those innocent domains. And so, in those innocent domains, what, as these boards, what are you approving as part of these products and services? And then, how do you have the governance in place to actually detect and prevent misuse of that information? Because you're right, people's faces, their images, their history, all of that is personal identifiable and it's protected, but in what form, what format? And then how are we enforcing that? And I think that's where we're falling down in governance.
I think so too. I think so too. So I think there's just practically, there's probably a bunch of different ways to look this. You've talked a lot about the leaders. I think one thing we haven't covered, maybe we've talked a lot about the recorded voice and the transcripts of that, is just chat. And all of us use Slack, or you might use Teams or whatever in the chat. And I think a lot of people at work don't realize all of that is being recorded. All of that is a record that can be subpoenaed in the worst case for a lawsuit, but definitely an admin can find all of that information.
Most definitely. At a previous company that we worked at, right? I don't know if we can say name on here or not. There was a rule. If it was attorney client confidential, you could not put anything about it in the calendar invite, because the conference rooms have their own accounts. I don't think people think about that
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
These non human objects with calendars and scheduling. What are you putting in those invites? What are you saying? Where is that being recorded? I think they had a prohibition there. If it was attorney client privilege, you could put that on the invite, but it better not have any attachments, because that conference room has its own Outlook calendar that you have to book, right?
Yeah,
And so it retains those attachments. I don't think people think about that. And as we start to look at somebody, so the one app in state of Texas, I know you use it, is the one where you have to verify you are who you are, right? When you go on some of the state websites. And I've noticed that there's some car leasing places and other places that use it. But they ask you to upload your driver's license, right? So you already have pretty much a good set of my personal identifiable information. And then you want me to upload my video of my actual image and voice. Now, you don't think I could, maybe I shouldn't say that on here, but that's
no,
not actually fail safe, because I could actually, if you're worried about me having a fraudulent driver's license, I probably would produce that before I got on there. You could use face recognition to find me eventually, but in the meantime, I've already procured the service.
yeah. I just there's so many ways you don't think about it. We're talking about the conference rooms having their own Outlook account, just made me think more and more of agents. So that's even the thing too. That data, as a leader, you have to really understand what data is being committed to text, whether it's from a voice to text translation,
Mhm.
creating an invite for a conference room, Slack messages, really quick things. All of that is recoverable. If it's retained as a record, it can be recovered. And that could be great for you because you're trying to figure something out, or it could be really bad for you in a lawsuit situation. So the least things, retaining data, less data means there's less things to recover, and which is, and this sometimes could be good. You want to limit what can be recovered. But I think that's a message not just for leaders, but for everything. If you just have to realize when you're at work, if you're working for a company, or if you're doing business with a company or getting a service from a company, whatever you commit to be typed in by yourself or somebody else, anybody's going to be able to see it. So you have to understand that. I think even I hate talking to the bots on the phone because I don't want them to have my voice and I don't want them to have all the things I might say. So I just try to use the numbers and figure out what is 1 and 2, yes and no, and just that, because I don't want them to record all that. So that's my little weird thing you might not have known about me.
But there are places now, credit card companies, banks, who are actually using your voice. That's biometric data. And we give it away every day. It's biometric data. We're giving it away on this recording. It's biometric data. And now they're asking you to use that as a passcode to get to your account, is your voice print. That's still biometric data. It's also data that could actually reveal some things about you that you're really not meaning to reveal, right?
Or potentially, that's what they say. It's revealing something you don't mean to reveal, but that's also a very unscientific way. I don't think it's very scientific because it's not cultural. So, like, all sorts of cultures could change the meaning of a voice inflection or a face look could be different. So, if we're all the same culture and we're all homogenous, then maybe that would be okay. But that,
we're not all the same. So I think that I'm going to push back a little on that. We're
that's
not all the same, right? We're
Right.
not. And, okay, I don't want to sound like MAGA. We're not all the same. And so when you're taking people's voice print, you can hear sometimes their accent.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
That goes to national origin. Sometimes, given the vernacular, you may be able to tell what part of the country they're from. You may be able to tell educational levels. You may be able to even tell racial identity. And in this country, it's self-reported, right? So that voice print, yeah, we give it away every day. We're doing that here, but that's still biometric data. It's the way you talk can't be recreated by someone else. I could imitate you, but the voice print will still show the difference between the imitation and the real thing.
Okay. Okay, I believe that the voice print will be the same. What I'm saying is sometimes they try to infer emotions or some other things, how the type of day you're having. That I don't think can be accurate all the time because.
So I agree with that. It's just my issue around voice prints is what I named.
Yeah.
And so even as people, I think of people who have health conditions that actually change their voice print, that have strokes, different things. And so that voice print will continue to change. You get older, you don't project as much. You may code switch, you may have a different tone and style. The voice print will still be the voice print. So that's what we give away every day. It's biometric. It's not James Bond. We're up getting our eyeball scanned, but it's one we give away every day.
But we are close to that. So I think we're close to that too. All right. So I think we've kind of talked about what this means for the governance and ethics implications for.
So, Gina, I've been thinking about what does this actually mean for women in tech? And I think about how we started the top of the episode with the new feature of highlighting women in tech. So if we look at Mary Ross, her work was still foundational, very sustainable, but she was hidden. She's another hidden figures if we think about it. So as we look at AI, and particularly around this topic, what are your thoughts about women in tech?
I think if records are something that's durable and written down, they can be weaponized, right? So in this case, the case we're talking about, this woman's records were weaponized against her. She brought her therapist, which is a normal thing to do, come and help me support my case against this employer. And the employer used those same records that since they were written down, all of her therapy sessions in black and white, they were able to use it against her. So I think whoever controls the data that's being produced in this era of AI, whoever controls the data of your doctor visits or of your therapist visits or of anything medical, whoever controls that data really, they own it. In a sense, it just dehumanizes you, which is very typical of ways we think of how, especially Native women, were marginalized and continue to be marginalized. I think that's the hard thing. If we're not in control of our records, then how can we be seen as full humans? We talked about that a little bit. So if we get dehumanized because we're just the bits and bytes of our therapy, then what are we? Just bleep. But I think all of that could be used in a good way. I think it's governance that will make that happen, though. How do we make sure we can use this, but not in a way that's extractive so that we are just left with bits and bytes?
So I like that. Because we see a lot of stories now about AI and the future of work. And there is the morale in the workplace, the AI layoffs. And so we are getting into a point, are we looking at people, or are we looking at them as data point and cost reduction? I
Yeah.
think a little of that has always been part of corporate anywhere, corporate international. I'm not going to say just corporate America, because you still do have that profit and loss statement. But I think here lately, the amount of stories that we continue to hear about companies laying off people for AI. I personally think some of that is AI washing, but we won't get into that today.
No,
But it does make people feel, where, what am I supposed to do? I'm being replaced by AI. And so it does impact the future of work. And I think that's something to be aware of, especially with the records. As you say, they could be used against you when those times come. But very good point.
and I think that's all the things we talked about are important. So just don't sign in to do a therapy session online. Make sure you understand if your conversation is being preserved as a record. Think about that when you're typing emails or chats or reservations for a conference room. Think about if this is being preserved as a record and adjust yourself accordingly and protect that piece of you. I think is
Well, I
important.
think we've got a really big case out here right now that I, for one, am looking forward to discoverability and seeing all the things that Elon Musk and OpenAI talked about. And if you're on a corporate board, don't be recording those board minutes. Do an AI transcriber. You probably want to still keep those very private, very old school. You show up to the meeting, you get a copy, you give them back. But yeah, so discoverability is something that, especially in the age of AI, just like everything else, it's going to expand what is the normal use case. But as these edge use cases become normal, there needs to be more governance, there needs to be more guardrails, there needs to be better communication of consent about what is actually happening. And then we have to take the responsibility to ask these questions.
I think so. And that's all it's going to take. So we've got a new way of computing, a different way of creating records that will be retained and used in different ways. So now we have to bring that all back in and make sure we put the human touch back on all of it.
So, Gina, as a founder in product marketing for years, you think of the different campaigns, the different things in white papers that you've created. What are your clients? What would they be most concerned about in this space?
I think it's the collaboration that happens really when you're trying to build messaging and you're trying to build that product strategy. A lot of that is all NDA, especially for something that hasn't been released. So I think they'd probably be most concerned about people seeing how the sausage is being made before,
Right.
you get that nice dinner at the end, which is really what we're talking about. If I was a competitor, maybe I would be looking for ways to get that information. I'm sure that corporate espionage still goes on, right?
Oh, most definitely. It
Not
definitely
with my
goes on.
clients, but my clients aren't that way. But I think even just hashing things out as you're thinking about how to present your product in the best light, you don't necessarily want all of that known to everybody. You want to present your best self, which is why you hire a product marketer. So they'd probably be most concerned about that, I think.
Okay.
How about your clients?
My clients are board level. So, again, the decisions you make in this space about your vendors, the data, What is your position on AI training of personal identifiable data as well as proprietary IP? You need to have that. It shouldn't be someone just think it shouldn't be a 5 minute conversation and assigning responsibility, but you should actually know what your position is for your product, your service, and your industry, I would say. For all of the things we talked about, some of these things are just housekeeping.
Yeah.
Yeah, retention, retrievability, traceability.
But don't you think some of that housekeeping has been maybe left for a later date because you've got people signing up for every new model, every new type of AI? Everybody's got, an AI chatbot that comes and sits in meetings with everybody else. Do you think some of that responsibility and some of that housekeeping, as you say, has been pushed aside because everybody is so enamored with AI?
But it always has been. We always go back to patch management, right? How
Yeah.
many companies actually do that well, really? And yeah, housekeeping gets pushed aside for the shiny new thing. So yeah, a lot of that happens. Who knows? I may have one or two assistants that join things that I cannot make it stop joining, no matter what I wanted to do.
Just like
And
an AI boyfriend.
you cut me out of millions of dollars behind that idea, and I
A
really
save.
don't want to talk about that. No, no, you didn't save me. I could have had. I just don't want to get into it. I may need a therapist behind that alone. I'm traumatized by the amount of money I lost with that idea.
Oh my goodness, I'm so powerful. I can get you to stop doing something. I'm amazed.
Okay, point taken.
All
But
right.
yeah, housekeeping, we just don't do patch management. I can think of a million things that have been the bane of IT for years.
I think there's a lot of stuff that's going to start coming up there because I think there is a whole underworld of trying to find ways to capture all of this information about what kind of prompts you use, with all that data that is stirred up when you're trying to build more data, even just with generative AI. And I think the chickens are going to come home to roost, and it's going to be pretty scary at some point because there's a big market for all of our data. Let me put it that way.
Most definitely. Data is the new oil, and we see what the price of that is going up to. But I think you made a really good point, and we didn't really dig into it. Maybe we can another day. But about the AI agents, right? What are you feeding them? And then when you turn them loose, what legacy data are they ingesting, consuming?
Who are they sharing it with?
Yeah.
Where is it? What other kind of records are they creating with that?
And so that whole records retention, traceability, retrievability becomes a big thing.
Okay, y'all, that's it for this episode of Tech Aunties. If this helped you cut through the noise, make sure you give us a follow and send this along to somebody else that needs a hype check. And if you've got a topic you'd like us to break down, send it our way. Stay smart, stay curious, and don't believe the hype.